Okay, all righty. It is 6 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to say good evening to everyone and welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Councilwoman Rhonda Logan, representing District 1 here in the city of Memphis. I'm Memphis City Council. I'm happy to have everyone today and welcome to Council in Your District. This is my 4th edition of Community Conversation Series, and today's topic is Minding Our Hearts and Minds. I'd like to thank all of the speakers for joining me today and look forward to each of them sharing some great information with you tonight. I want to introduce the panel here. I'm just going to give a few pointers and then they can expand and expound on it as they're presented. First, I want to welcome Dr. Altha Stewart. Dr. Stewart is the Senior Associate Dean for Community Health Engagement at UT Health Science Center here in Memphis and Associate Professor and Chief of Social Community Psychiatry, as well as Director for the Center of Health and Justice Involved Youth. And one thing that I did want to note, she served as the 145th President of the American Psychiatric Association. She's the first African-American elected to this position in the 175-year history of the organization. And that was in 2018 through 2019. I just want to say thank you for being here, Dr. Altha, and we really appreciate what you're going to bring to the conversation. And if you would just kind of go ahead and give us a little bit of introduction, and then we want you to share with the people how during this time citizens and residents of the city of Memphis can really attend to and give care for their mental and emotional well-being during this time. You know, we're dealing with a lot in our nation, in our city, and we just want to make sure people are giving attention to their personal well-being and able to continue on. So if you would just kind of give your take and feedback on that.
Well, first, let me say thank you for inviting me to join this wonderful panel. I think you've assembled some great folks, and I'm proud to be among them. As you heard, I'm Dr. Altha Stewart. I'm on the faculty at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and my area of responsibility these days is right in keeping with the topic that you have for this session tonight. We are in the midst of a pandemic. Okay, I think somebody muted me and it may have been me by accident. This technology can be a little challenging. But what I was saying is we're in the midst of a pandemic within a pandemic right now. And between the coronavirus and the series of events that have transpired over the last couple of weeks, beginning with the murder of Mr. Floyd, I think especially in the Black community, all over, but especially in the Black community, now is the time that we really do need to pay attention to our mental health and well-being. And I know you've got some experts in this area on this panel. And as I said, I'm proud to be among them. But I will offer a few tips that I've been sharing with people over the last couple of weeks for what I think we can do individually and collectively to take better care of ourselves emotionally. Before Mr. Floyd's murder, I was primarily talking to people about how to deal with the fear and anxiety and concern and uncertainty around the coronavirus pandemic. And there was a fair amount of concern. Either you were in the group of people who were sent home to work, or you were in the group of people who are considered essential. And there are different issues that each of those groups would face. If you're able to work from home, you might now be in a situation where not only are you doing your regular work, but you're now perhaps in a home with your spouse or partner or family, And for many people in the Black community, this is a multi-generational setup at home. You might have a parent or an elderly relative, several children, yourself, and maybe even a sibling or good friend who lives with you. And that creates, in the course of a 24-hour day, a lot of stress for everybody. And so we recommended that people understand that that was natural. It is normal to be stressed out in situations like this. That is not an abnormal pathological thing. And that people can do a few things to remind themselves to remain calm, to help them deal with the stress and the other things. The very first thing I began asking people to do was stop watching nonstop news. That breaking news story today at 8 o'clock in the morning is still going to be news at 8 o'clock at night. And you don't have to watch every 5 minutes in development of that, because all that was doing for most people was adding to the anxiety and the feeling of uncertainty about what they were facing. The second thing was that everybody, if you lived in a household with other people, you needed to establish a schedule and some boundaries. If you're working from home, it is very hard to do your work while you're managing to take care of kids or making sure that the elderly relative is being fed or given their medication. And that meant redoing the whole household schedule. And for some people, that is a challenge because they're used to just doing everything. But when you've got all those multiple layers of responsibility, you can't do everything for everybody. And you've got to learn how to say no. You've got to learn how to ask for help. And then finally, you've got to learn to stick to what you set up. And for many people, and especially I found when I was doing these sessions, many of the questions from Black women would be, well, how do I get all of this done? The answer is you don't. You get other people in the household to help you, and you acknowledge that you need that help. The third thing was that if there are kids in the house who are out of school, got lots of energy, may or may not be following up on their schoolwork, you have to help them structure their day also. Typically, if they're in school, there are things they do in the morning, then there's a break in the middle of the day, maybe some recreation depending on what kind of school they go to, and then more learning. We can structure the home school day in that same way, but it takes being intentional about it. It's not just going to happen because you say, go study. You really do have to communicate. You have to understand that there are going to be times when all you really want is to be away from people, and you have to allow yourself that time away. And then you build in, the final thing is you build in some family time or together time if it's just you and another person, so that you attend to the relationship. You don't want the relationship to suffer because you're so busy doing and keeping things together. So you have to build that in. And that's really important when you are stuck and literally stuck in the house because of a pandemic. Now, when you layer all that on top of the incident with the murder of Mr. Floyd, then you've got an additional psychological compelling reason to be angry, frustrated, concerned about the uncertainty and fear of the future, and all that has happened in the last couple of weeks politically, socially, with the protest, and again, with the nonstop news coverage. We have got to learn to remove ourselves from this constant bombardment of everything visual on TV, social media, on our devices. We have got to break that habit of addiction to news. It is still going to be there as news tomorrow. And we need to allow ourselves a little break from time to time. So those are kind of the general categories of what we encourage people to do for their good mental health. I'm afraid I can't hear you.
Ashley. Hello?
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. That's okay.
Okay. One thing I wanted to point out is, as a psychiatrist, if you could touch on the medical piece to that, or the health, the physical health, in terms of how all of this can, can weigh in on our physical health.
Mhm. The virus itself impacts us significantly, and I think everybody by now is, because we listen to the news all the time, I think everybody by now is aware of the fact that in the Black community we have a much more negative outcome from contracting the coronavirus, mainly because we have a lot of pre-existing conditions that are directly related to the sort of way the healthcare system is designed, and poverty and racism and a whole host of other factors. But because we are also more likely to have a negative outcome, it is more important that we do two things. We need to be tested, and now initially you couldn't get tested unless you had symptoms. Now we understand a little better the importance of, even if I don't have a symptom, if I'm in a high risk category. And by high risk, I mean, if you've got hypertension, diabetes, if you've had cancer and have had some kind of cancer treatment, which suppresses your immune system, if you have diabetes, if you've got kidney disease, almost any of the things that in a negative way impact Black people more health-wise than every other population, we are a setup for having a bad outcome. And so we have to get tested, and we have to be mindful of the fact that if we are carrying the virus without symptoms, we can pass it on to people unknowingly. And since many of us live in houses with people who have those illnesses, we shouldn't be going back and forth exposing them.
Absolutely, absolutely. But and also in terms of the fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty, the frustration, the anger, all of those feelings, how do they weigh in on our physical health? That's kind of what I wanted you to speak to as a medical doctor.
Okay, yeah, well, okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. The way that impacts us is that every time I'm stressed, I put additional stress in my mind, and emotionally, there is additional stress on my body. When I get stressed, my heart rate goes up, my blood pressure goes up, the chemicals in my body get produced at higher rates. All of those things impact an organ, whether it's the kidneys or the brain or the heart. Everything that we do that's related to those emotions you described, anxiety, fear, frustration, uncertainty, create a cycle in our bodies that generates, they're fancy names for them, but it's basically a chemical in our body that gets released. And once it starts attacking an organ, it starts to wear it down or impact it or make it diseased. And once that happens, that organ doesn't function well. If it's our kidneys, you can get kidney disease. If it's our heart, it can impact and you could have a heart attack. If it's our brain, we may have a stroke. And I don't say these things to frighten people, but to help them make the connection as to why we need to stay as calm as possible when these things happen. Because every time my blood pressure goes up, something is going on in my body that is not good.
Absolutely. And all of the issue, the media and the triggers or the things that are coming in our sense gates are acting as a thermometer almost, and moving, causing us to have these reactions. And I wanted to really point that out, because in a lot of communities, particularly the Black community, we often discredit or discount the fact that our bodies create chemicals. Produce chemicals that affect our psyche and affect our emotions. And a lot of times people will self-medicate, and it's the same effect. They're trying to counteract the things that they're experiencing with that. So I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to speak to that. So these are things that we can begin to look at in our community, whether our children, our neighbors, our relatives, making certain that if there's chronic illness there during this time, that could be a response to all of these triggers.
That's correct. You said it well. Thank you.
Okay, great, great, great. Well, I appreciate that. And anything else you think of? I know you're going to have to leave, so if there are any questions that come about, I wanted to make sure that you had a platform to introduce that conversation. I know we have so many things going on in our community, but our health, we won't be able to peacefully protest or to, fight for our rights if we are not healthy. We won't be able to do anything if we're not healthy. And there's a lot going on right now that we need to mind our physical and psychological health.
Well, there are two things I would like to add. I think I have an extra, but as long as it's not bothering everybody else, it's the children. We have to pay attention to our kids during these and I mean especially we can't ignore their feelings. We can't or poo-poo that they don't understand, so it's okay. They do understand. There is a significant amount of trauma. Their lives have been destroyed. For those who've lost family members to the virus, there are kids who are mourning a family member that they won't get to properly mourn. They worry about that parent who goes out to work because they see on TV that people die from this thing, and they're worried. We're seeing a lot more kids having trouble with, young kids who were potty trained starting to wet the bed, older kids who've been really well behaved starting to act out. All of this has to do with how they're handling what's going on. And as adults, we really have to pay better attention to them and their needs and talk to them. Every child has an age-appropriate way that we should be communicating what's going on with the virus, what it means to us as a family, what we can do, and what's out of our control. It helps them to know that the adult understands and is worried. So we can't say, oh, it's okay, don't worry, everything's fine, because they know better. We got to be honest with them as best we can and according to how old they are and what they understand. The other thing I think is in the midst of the second pandemic, in the aftermath of the murder of Mr. Floyd, I think we also have to converse with each other as we are moving around to protest and to ask for reform. Let's not forget to continue to use the good public health guidelines. Masks are okay to wear in a protest. It's very fine. Social distancing can work in a protest. If we really want to get rid of this virus, we have to do those things to keep the spread from getting worse. So I appeal to people, exercise your right to protest, but do it in a mindful and healthy way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for those reminders and that information. And anything else that you think of, just jump right in. And I'm going to move now to Dr. and Mrs. Young, William Young. And I guess y'all gonna tag team or co-talk. But you all have an extensive history in the city, 35 years, Dr. Young, in counseling as a licensed professional, specializing in marriage and family therapy, professional counseling, and clinical pastoral as a clinical pastoral therapist. And you also specialize in grief, stress, and burnout. And Mrs. Young has been managing the Emotional Fitness Centers and Wellness and Stress Clinic of Memphis for some time now. And you also facilitate support groups and individual and marriage counseling. And I'd like for you all, if you would, to kind of share anything else about yourself that you'd like the public to know, as well as talk, if you could kind of framework or talk about how all of this is impacting families. How all of this, how families can, move forward together, and anything else you want to say. I know there may be some things that you want to share, but if you can include in that how families can really move forward in this. And we're going to, when you're done, we'll have Keith Fussell. He's going to talk to us about individuals, and I want our next guest, Tara C, to talk about our children and our youth. So we'll move forward in that vein, if you would. Dr. and Mrs. Young. Okay, we can't hear you either. Hold on, what? Are you all muted on your end? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we're learning, Dr. Stewart, we're learning over here. I'm going to just talk a little bit before he comes and just mention the fact that I think one of the most important things about us is that we pastor the Healing Center on Chulahoma Road in Oak Haven. So that's important to us because possibly some of our members are listening, and we want them to know that we're shouting out to them even during this season. And you know you got to do that, Commissioner.
Yes, ma'am.
But I think one of the things Dr. Stewart has touched on a lot of things, but one of the things, even coming from a place of faith and community, one of the things that have changed and that's causing a lot of stress is our grieving. Is the way we're dealing with our deaths, and that's something that we don't talk about. Families are losing family members, and now we can't comfort each other. We can't be there for one another. I mean, we can't go to the hospital. We can't do the funerals, and many people are grieving. And I think that maybe William will touch on that a little bit because he's written a book, The Morning After. So grief is one of the specialties, and we're getting more grief than anything now. That is our main call, is grief. So William, you can take it.
Yeah, and further introducing myself, I was the first African American chaplain at Western State Mental Hospital in Bolivar, Tennessee. And after 3.5 years there, I became the first African American chaplain at Methodist. So it's been 46 years of dealing with mental health and dealing with some of the worst and some of the ones that we're seeing today. I want to commend Dr. Stewart for really laying out the groundwork for what we need to do. The mind is so very important. James Allen, in 1828, wrote a book called As a Man Thinketh. And he was talking about the mind. He said the mind is the master of the body. If you put good things in the mind, then the body begins to build itself up. But if you put negative things in the mind, the body rapidly moves into disease and decay. I've operated on that premise that stress is one of the stress, worry, depression. All of these are things that are happening today in light of the coronavirus. And then when George Floyd was murdered, you got a mixture of emotions that people are trying to deal with. One of the ways that I see that can help us in dealing is, first of all, get an awareness about what your mental status is. You know, we have tests for everything else, but we don't test our minds. When we get ready to see people, what we do is we do an assessment. And, you know, when people call us, we do an assessment and then we send them to the proper places of help. In the last couple of weeks, I've had 2 people who were trying to commit suicide. One was somebody who referred their relative to me, and the other one was another lady that I know. And so I had to make an assessment, and then I had to make an intervention, whereas since she had a pistol, I had to make sure that I got the gun away from her in order that the police would not shoot her. You know, there's a lot of intercessions that need to be made around suicide. Many people are thinking of suicide now. People as young as 6 years old are taking their lives. So when we start talking about caring for the mind, we have to lose a lot of this old faith that we had when we said that God is going to take care of everything. All we got to do is pray about it. Now you got to pray, you got to get an assessment, you got to get some care, and you got to get some aftercare. And I think one of the biggest things that's happening right now is that people are dying. I mean, what's happening is a mass grief. There's a great loss. You got so many 100,000 deaths at the same time. You got young men murdered by racist cops. And so we haven't had time to grieve. Anger is a normal part of grieving. But you have to understand that anger can be destructive. And so we need some help in terms of helping people to realize that you cannot operate off of all these emotions unrestrained. And so I'll be open for other questions. I do supervise people who are trying to get their license. State of Tennessee is, after these many years, I've been given this supervisory license to be able to help young counselors. We need more people going into the field that deals with the mind. And I want to commend you, Commissioner, for taking this task of bringing to our people a good look at taking care of our minds.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you all too, because it's so important. You brought up a point about mass grief. That kind of struck me, because not only are we grieving the loss of some of our relatives, we're grieving the loss of George Floyd and the rest of those that have been murdered, but we're also grieving potentially a loss of a job or a career, a loss of a way of life, having to find a new normal, and a lot of that is tied into there. And some of the steps that grief takes us through, people are experiencing that now and don't really realize what's happening with them. So your point of getting an assessment is quite poignant right now and relevant, because just like you would go get a checkup if you're not feeling well, or go to the doctor and get checked out, you should go if you're not feeling well in your emotions. I always tell everybody, if you have a dentist, if you have a beautician or a barber, if you have a cardiologist, you need a therapist as well. So just want to make sure that people heard what you said. That was very powerful. That at some level, a lot of people are experiencing grief, and it's not just because of death, but it's because of loss. So that's a good point. And we're going to come back to you all, or if you have anything else, just raise your hand, jump in. So now we're going to, and thank you for sharing that. You all brought out some great points. I'm going to move to Keith Fussell, who is in private practice as a professional counselor and marriage and family therapist at the Christian Counseling Center of Bartlett. He too specializes in marriage, parenting, family life, professional issues, and work-life balance and mental health. So I want to welcome you, Keith Fussell. I did want to also say, past Dr. William Young and my father used to be in Bolivar years and years ago. So we have an extensive history. So he's been in mental health for a long time. As a pastor, as a man of faith, I appreciate you. And Mr. Fussell did some of my supervision early on as well. So I'm grateful for all of you being here. And Keith, when you give a little bit about yourself, I also want you to talk about individual therapy and how important that is during that time, whether people are experiencing PTSD or whether they're are having problems coping. We'd like for you to kind of speak to some of the things that we're seeing now in individuals, and they may not know what they're experiencing.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for having me. Feel honored to be on this panel. I was hoping you had mentioned that you had been an intern and in supervision, so I kind of get to see you full circle, which is pretty neat. I'm also glad I used a much younger picture of myself on the screen there so that you kind of see, boy, that guy's gotten old. He just doesn't take pictures very much. I was also checking off the things on my list that Dr. Stewart stole me to the punch for, which is kind of what happens, right? We're thinking a lot of similar stuff. But this whole last 4 months or whatever it's going on has been very difficult on our population. I know I worked exclusively from home for like 2.5 months, which if you'd have told me a year ago I'd be doing that, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Because I knew what teletherapy was, but I had never done much of it. So I continued to support myself, thankfully, and most of my clients were able to work on a format similar to this. And it's just that fact of being able to talk and express yourself and have an unbiased person who's willing to listen and process and point out things that you may not be thinking. I think if we've ever needed that, we need it especially now. I did have a couple things on my list that she didn't steal me to the punch on, which I was grateful for. Just getting out and exercise, and I am not the world's shiniest example of that, but we need to do it more and more. It was a beautiful night on the Green Line last night, I'll have to say, on my bicycle with that cool temperature. So get out there while you can and do some things like that. But just getting out and out of your normal routine. She did mention to have a routine. Don't stay in your pajamas all day if you're working from home, because that makes you feel like you're unemployed or a bum or something, at some point, and you're not. You're on a different schedule. So may not have to put on a coat and tie, but put on something that shows I'm here to work. I'm here to get some things done. I also thought of an acronym. Actually, one of my supervisees helped me with that this morning, Rhonda. I told him, I'm going to be on a panel tonight. What would you guys say is the most important thing? So he came up with this. I'll give Ron Surgeon credit for this. I don't know where he got it, but he's one of the counselors at Cardia, which is another faith-based practice here in our town. Used to be Sage Hill, Memphis. But the acronym is SMURF, and it's got nothing to do with little blue cartoon characters. Let's put it that way. But he said to watch out for your spiritual life. How is that? That's the F. Even if church is not meeting, which a lot of us have gotten more used to this online church than we thought we ever would, it's still important. My own church, we've got Facebook Live, so you can interact a little bit while the service is going on. But more importantly, that your private spiritual life, whatever that looks like, whatever you're reading, whatever your spiritual practices are, please don't stop that, during the pandemic, and especially all of the racial tension of the last few weeks. I mean, we need whatever that spiritual life looks like. Most of us Christianity, but try not to leave others out, of course, to be involved in that. The M is your mental status. What are you doing to keep healthy that way? I want to amen her. Don't just be watching whatever your news channel is. I won't say one because that will alienate all the others, right? But whatever your news channel is, you don't need to be watching that 8 hours a day, please. I get about 20-30 minutes of news in the morning. Usually is about all I need. I'm not the most informed, but know if you've got something major that you need to be praying about, or at least that my clients will be talking about, but not just 24/7. Even though that's available, we don't need to be doing that. And reading something totally unrelated to all of this, if that's scripture, if that's good fiction, if you like to read that, putting something in your mind to kind of keep it in a healthy state. The E of the acronym is emotional. How is your emotional health going? If you've got a significant other, are you paying attention to them? I know the Youngs spoke more to the marriage relationship, but we are both marriage and family therapists, so we all believe in that, of course. But it's either a really good time for together couple time, or it's a really challenging time. I've had a little bit of both, and the weird thing with teletherapy is I'm seeing right into their living room or kitchen, kind of watching some of that going on. So, being kind to each other, saying those things you need to say and not say, probably even more important. Investing, even though you're probably not going out on dates as much because of the pandemic, but a date can be wherever you are, right? So if it can be take out food on the back porch, or it can be playing a board game if your wife wants to do that. That was a jab at myself, because I'm usually the one that's hesitant to do that. Whatever it is that enriches your relationship. And that's the R, is relational. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. The F is just functional of that acronym. What's your functional health like? Are you continuing to bathe and change clothes? Are you continuing to get exercise, which kind of goes back to that earlier point? Are you eating healthy, or is it junk food all the time? A lot of this stuff is kind of common sense, but we lose sight of that when you've got all this going on around you. I'm just grateful for you doing this program and for allowing people to listen and hopefully ask some questions in a few minutes. But yes, individual therapy is very important. A lot of folks don't know that their health insurance probably covers that. If it can get some benefit from that may just be a copay, or you've got, hopefully some of the churches have ways set up for that. We have contracts with 8 or 10 churches that send their members to us. So I think everybody sees the value of that, especially in our day and age when you may not be able just to go next door to mom or dad's, or you might be able to, but don't need to put them in the middle of everything, and having that impartial view. That's what a lot of clients will say, is that you're not saying anything really that's all that novel or brilliant, but you're listening to me, and I can tell that you care about me, and that's kind of the main thing that therapy has to add. So I appreciate the question, Rhonda.
And listening is something that is an art. And sometimes with everything going on now, I'm finding that we aren't listening to each other, even in the same home.
Right.
We're thinking about so much right now. We're thinking about work, because a lot of us are working at home. We're thinking about the importance of being a part of this movement, and making sure that we are staying healthy and not, dealing with COVID. And I mean, something as simple as, where's my mask? You're looking for your mask. You're making sure that you are watching, like you said, a lot of people are wanting to make sure that they're watching the news and keeping up on this and that. So we're not doing as much listening. We're not listening to our spouse or our significant other. We're not listening to the children. And sometimes, you listen through what you see as well, and it's important that we don't forget to listen to each other, because that's what's needed. And so when you said that, that resonated with me, having someone that's outside of your home to listen to, and that can be impartial about what's going on. So that is really key. If you would kind of touch on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, if you would, just to introduce that, because I see a lot of symptoms, that we're seeing out here, and I really want people to understand the context of it, and how, it's not, you don't have to have been in a mental institution to some people we used to call crazy. It's not that, but so just kind of share about that a little bit.
Yeah, it stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't have the the whole criteria memorized, but basically you've been exposed to something either as a participant and got started with war veterans. I'll get it out from I believe Vietnam was kind of the first round of that everybody realized these guys, something is still wrong, because they're home from military, but if there's a loud bang, they're taking cover, they're reacting physically to these stimuli around. I know we're not talking about I guess we could be, some veterans from the Gulf, of course, could be listening in, but primarily it's just all these other things that can happen. So any kind of trauma, abuse, attack by somebody, even vicariously, and that's one thing that's been pointed out is, folks have watched the murder of Mr. Floyd way too many times. It's just painful to see that. I got the one glimpse of it, and I've got it. It's horrible. It should not have happened. But apparently there's some folks who have watched the entire, whatever that segment is, 8 minutes. So that's kind of re-victimizing yourself, is almost what the language of PTSD would say. So if you notice hypervigilance, where you're prepared for dangers that may or may not be there, having trouble sleeping, having trouble relaxing, crying spells, lack of appetite, all of those things could be a symptom of PTSD. Not saying you have that if you have one or two of those, but it would be something you'd want to explore with a mental health professional. But particularly, childhood sexual abuse or some kind of attack, all of that's most definitely where you're kind of feeling the event long after it's happened to you. So that's why psychological things, in a lot of ways, are much more painful. If I break my arm, it hurts, and I wear the cast and it heals, but I probably don't think about that very much, other than maybe the cause of why it happened. But psychological, mental pain just lasts a whole lot longer. That's probably a longer answer than you wanted there, but.
Oh, no, that's fine. And I appreciate you touching on that. And I'm sure some of the others will expound on that as well. So stay, as I've told the other therapists, stay on board, and you may have some questions, or you may have something else to add, but thank you so much for sharing that. And
Sure.
now I want to allow our next guest, Miss Tara C. Am I pronounced your last name?
C. You got it right.
Okay. Yes. Who's with us tonight? I kind of want you to touch on youth and kind of tell about what you do. Miss Ashley, if you could put up her bio, I greatly appreciate that. It's not coming up on my screen. Right. Okay. All right. Great. You are the director of Universal Parenting Place at Christ Community Health Services, and you have been, dealing with children and youth and parenting for a very long time. Clinical supervisor for Youth Villages Intercept program, and where you manage a team of therapists providing in-home treatment to at-risk youth and their families. So if you would just kind of talk to us about our children, our youth, and give us some pointers on parenting during this time with everything that's going on.
Absolutely. One good thing about going last is that I got a lot of people helping me give some things out without me having to share those, so I can make it a little brief. But what I would say for parenting, definitely, I want everybody to get a good understanding that parenting is not an easy job. It's the hardest job that you'll ever have in life. So I think with parents having the expectation and setting the bar to normal, they can take deep breaths and understand that this is just something that that's a journey. There is no manual. We love to have a manual on parenting, but there just is no manual because things are different. Every child is different. You can have 10 kids, and I can guarantee you, not from experience that I know, but from what I've been told, is that each of those kids, like a snowflake, is very unique and different. And so the best advice I can say to parents is, one, be very self-aware. Get to know and establish a relationship with all of your kids. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is that some of our parents who are very intentional, especially our Christian parents, they have mixed the idea of perfect parenting with, having a spiritual life, which all these things are good, but a lot of times our spiritual life and the structure that we put in place causes us not to develop a relationship with our children. And what do I mean is that we take them to church. So we know that they're getting, Bible school there. And then sometimes we put them in private school. And so we assume, oh, they're getting the best of education. And we put them in all of these extracurriculars, which again, are amazing pro-social factors. And we do want to encourage parents to do that, but do not let any of these things get in the way of the fact that you still have to develop a relationship with your child. There have been a lot of churchy children who, they know their parents meant well, but they never understood them. They never understood struggles that they had. And so for my therapeutic practice, we deal with adverse childhood experiences, which is a buzzword. And so some of the protective factors needed for a child is helping them process things. And so in this pandemic, or these pandemics, I would say relationship, the stronger the relationship with your child, the more you can help them process and be resilient. We can't promise them a life of no stress because that's just not possible. But what we can do is, when you know your child, you know that your child is not okay. For our teens, we need to know what our child is doing on their phone. I always tell parents, please do not think, children do have privacy. I do get it. But as long as you're paying the phone bill and you're paying the mortgage, you need to know what your child is doing behind the doors of their room, and you need to know who their friends are, and you need to have conversations with them about what's going on so that you can help them navigate through some of the issues that they may be experiencing. And you also want to know, just because your child may not be talking to you, you want to know what their friends are talking about. And it's okay to seek help for your children. Don't think because you don't hear from them, or they're not saying anything, or they're not displaying signs, that everything is okay, when in fact it may not be okay. They may not know how to approach you because, again, that relationship has not been built. Also, goal setting during this time. Parents should also take this time to help their children set goals from themselves. And so with that, you find out that, pushing your children, you're just pushing your children's potential. You can find that out from just establishing goals and helping them to establish goals, especially during this downtime. Um, I think somebody said something about supports. Yes, supports are needed. You cannot do everything. And so you need to know who is a good support. You need to know who you can rely on to help watch your children, or who can help give you sound advice. Any support you have, you need to know, do like a support inventory, financial support, emotional support, childcare support, any type of support. You need to be making a list of who that is, and then make life fun. A lot of what has been said is structure, routine, all of that. But you need to learn how to have fun with your children. Children should not always see you telling them what they do wrong. I always tell parents, start with strength building. What are the strengths of your child? We hear about all of what's going on wrong with your child, but what is it that your child does well? What is it that your child enjoys? Let's capitalize on some of those things and help your child to understand how to combat their struggles using their strengths. And so again, sometimes children and parents may not know what that strength is because they're focusing on the negative. And as some of the panelists have mentioned, there's a lot of negative going on. And so if you cannot pull out any positives, that means you're focusing too much on the negative. And so helping your child to figure out what's going on well, helping to talk, knowing how to talk to your child during this pandemic is also important, because we know that the building blocks of the brain can be impacted with traumatic experiences. And so how your child processes this event or not is very, very important. And so with that in mind, you are one of the things that help to build the resiliency in your child's brain. And I think that's about it.
So what are some, you brought out a point about what are your child's strengths. I think that was really key, because during this time we are hearing so much negative, and our children are hearing so much, and not necessarily, I'm not going to say negative, so many adverse situations, or so many so much of the realities of our world that are negative, but it's the reality. It's a world that we live in. So how do you focus on their strengths, and how do you bring that aspect out and create that conversation and that narrative in a world of so much turmoil right now, and so much uncertainty? What are some things that you actually can do? And I want you all to think about that. I'm going to go to our next, our final guest, panelist, and bring her on, and then I'll come back and I'll kind of hear from all of you on that. How do we do that in a practical way with all that's going on now? But I want to bring on Dr. Futrell, who's a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm going to allow her to come and introduce herself as she will. She's not, I think you're by phone, right, Dr. Futrell?
I am. My
You all be able to, so we
difficulties.
can hear you. Thank you so much for being with us, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice, and then we want you to share with our listeners and viewers on how they can maintain their mental health, or safeguard their mental health through this time, and emotional health through this time of uncertainty in our world.
Well, my experience in mental health is long but short, I like to say, because I don't like to say that it's too long. That might say I'm a little old, but that's not the case. But I've been in various aspects of mental health. I've worked with intellectually delayed individuals who have sexually inappropriate behavior. They don't commit sexual offenses because they're not adjudicated. I've worked with children. I work with military. I don't think there's a population yet that I haven't worked with, and I don't know if that has always been by choice, but it's been great for me to experience so many different individuals in their different walks of life, and just trying to get through this thing called life. My practice, we try to take a very holistic approach with helping individuals, just teaching them, just tapping into their strengths, like Miss C, Dr. C, stated that not just for children, but we try to help some of the adults that we work with do the same thing, because a lot of times that's what's going on with us as adults. We become depressed, we become anxious, and we focus so much on trying to be this perfect individual that we forget that there are strengths that we do have. And, being able to take care of yourself holistically would mean focusing on eating the right things, which affects your brain and your body chemistry, and being able to exercise and learning when you release those endorphins, what that does for you, and having good close connections with other people, and just how powerful touch is to another person, and prayer. And even if you aren't a religious person, I work with a lot of A&D individuals, so teaching them that just having some type of spiritual connection doesn't mean you don't have to have a quote unquote God, but having some type of higher power that you believe in is something that's motivating for you to keep moving forward.
Okay. Hello? Did you cut off?
Yes, I'm
okay.
here.
I wanted to touch on, you said the power of touch. That was key. But in a society where we're practicing social distancing and we're not allowed to touch you. You really can't hug, you know, and I know in my world, being a PK in the faith-based community, and in Memphis in general, in the South, we love to hug, we love to shake hands, we love to embrace and laugh, you know, laugh and love real hard. And we're not able to do that. You know, people are, they want to do it and you're afraid to do it.
Right.
So how do you, how do we process that, and how do we compensate for that? I'm going to let you start, but anybody can speak to that.
You know, when I think about that, I think how difficult it was for me transitioning from working with the quote unquote general population and then working with the IDD offenders, because they being intellectually delayed, they miss a lot of social cues, but having the issue with the sexually inappropriate behavior, the setting that we were in, they were not allowed to touch. And it was difficult to try to connect with them and have that connection and be able to do those things, but still, you know, you can't touch. The only thing you could do is fist bump, no hugs, no patting on the back, no encouragement. So to convey that type of closeness with an individual, to show them that you're supporting them and you want to be there for them, a lot of it was, you know, being very intentional with your words, making sure that when you are having a conversation with someone, whether it's face to face or on video, which the oxymoron here, you can't see me, but when you're on video, you know, making sure that you're giving someone full attention, being very mindful when you're with another person, putting the phone down, making sure that you can't even hear the phone, complimenting or discussing what you see out of a person, and just acknowledging those different things can create those very similar feelings that you get with the closeness and the intimacy of a touch.
Absolutely. Those are excellent things that we need to embrace. And I would like for you to share them in the chat. What, you know, because now we need to learn those things now moving forward, being intentional when we talk to people, being intentional with your words, being mindful of the conversations and the interactions. A lot of times we're passing each other by. We're talking as we go. We're eating on the run right now. We're going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. But those things that you just said are really powerful and things that we need to really hone in on as key to moving forward. Things that we need to adopt. When they talk about the new normal, these are some of the things that we need to make sure that are high on the list, and that, you know, we move in and engage in the new normal. That was really powerful. I'm going to throw this out here to all of you, and thank you, Dr. Futrell, for that opening statement. You know, with all of the news and everything that's surrounding the racial tension or the climate in our country right now, how do we find that balance in the sense of being dedicated to the cause, but being active in our lives, you know, remaining active in your life and in your world, and they are, you know, basically one and the same in a sense, but making sure that we are moving forward in a way that's going to be positive and not just engulfing all of the negative energy that has attached itself to this for one, the life of George Floyd, or the cause per se. How do we stay positive and build and accomplish those things that we have to from a sound presence of mind?
Well, I would definitely say, going back to tie in what you mentioned earlier, capitalizing on the strengths. So everybody does not have the physical ability to go out and protest, but you focus on what you can control, what you can contribute. And so if you are good at writing emails, that may mean, hey, you and your children look up your local councilwoman, councilman, your state representatives, and you send them emails. You develop a BFF relationship with them, contacting the school board, letting them know how you feel, letting your voice be heard. If you have to make that a daytime job, doing that every day, that's your strength. If it's just a lot of us get on Facebook or Instagram and we do a lot of stuff that may not be productive, but how about, getting on live and creating a community? Because, it's only so many people that the professionals can reach. But if you know that you have a voice and you have an opinion, how about you create a group and have some dialogue? Because I think one of the things that a lot of scholars have mentioned during all of this is having conversations, making sure that your conversations include several different types of cultures and are very diverse, because a lot of people are just not necessarily in a negative connotation ignorant, but they really are. They are oblivious. They don't know what Black Lives Matter means. They don't know what other people are going through. And so sharing that dialogue is something that's within their scope and within their ability. And so you can make an impact if you can just educate somebody on how you're feeling, and they realize, oh, that's why they're so upset, or this is what this means. And so I always tell people, a lot of times adverse childhood experiences is something that is passed epigenetically. And so what does that mean? Even though I didn't experience slavery, I may not like to be shackled down and bound, and that may cause some type of anxiety simply because that's in my DNA to be hyper aroused in that type of hostile situation. And so those are things that we can communicate. But again, I think everybody focusing on things that they can do. If it's just making a sign, that's important. If it's just donating to causes, there are several different good causes that are out there. You can just donate your money so that the people who are able to carry some things out, you are contributing in your own way. And so that's my take on it.
Absolutely. And I had a conversation with a colleague, a Caucasian colleague, and, just a very candid conversation. And I think some of us that grew up with integration, having those candid, if you're friends and you all both say you're friends, you should be able to have those candid conversations. And, some of our children have gone to school predominantly Caucasian schools, predominantly white schools, and they have friends that so now there's a lot of tension. Should I be friends? Should I not be friends?
Yeah.
So how do you, Keith, I want you to share your thoughts on that as well. You may have some insight as well, but we have to make sure that we're giving our children, because, a lot of us have put children in private schools. You live in predominantly white neighborhoods, and our children are seeing one thing, but now they're sensing the tension, how, that dynamic. How do you help them with that conversation, whether it's a Caucasian child, a white child that's dealing with, how do I embrace my Black friend, or it's an African American child, how do I, stay friends, or how do I handle my friendship in light of what's going on?
Well, I'm most definitely still learning this one, Rhonda. I don't have this. I'm not satisfied with where I am in this at all. And kind of like with your colleague, I mean, I would just love to listen, and I'm doing that as much as I can. Kids go from what we model for them and what we present. Wish I had done some things with my kids differently. My youngest is 22, so kind of that most of that job is gone, but they still talk to us some. But I think, a lot of us as Caucasian people are just beginning to start figuring out, what this is all about, because there's been resistance, of course. I still pick up a lot of that, even trying to bring up the topic. So we won't go into all the ifs and buts about that, but just, if you are friends, as you said, I think you and I could do that. If I ask you tell me about them, help me with that situation, you would do that. So please be open about that in a way that people can hear it. That's the thing about communication. You only take in what you fully, not just hear, but kind of understand and hear in that relational context, I guess, if that makes any sense. So
Okay.
I feel like I'm the outsider on this question, but I'm I'm all ears, so I'm trying to pick up as much as I can.
But being honest and open is the start, you know, like you said. And I want to now hear from Dr. Young. I think you're muted, Dr. Young. Okay, now we can hear you.
Can you hear me? I said for the last 3 years, we've had a dialogue with a church, a white church here in the city. And we have been talking about race. The first time that we met, I asked a very difficult question. I asked, why was not the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue torn down? And a white gentleman pulled me to the side and he said, because we were afraid. And then he went on to tell me some other things that were going on. But on yesterday, we kept that dialogue going, and they put a sign on our property saying, we stand with you, Black Lives Does Matter. And so, you know, there's, I count that as being a lot of progress. It wasn't an easy road, but I think that the impact of that death touched humanity in such a way that very few people could remain the same. It's changing people. There's a wind that's blowing in the world today that it's going to be some sweeping changes. But it came through pain. It came through decades of pain.
Absolutely.
So and I wanted to say something about the PTSD. I don't get on that. When I came back, I experienced that.
Wow.
Everything that my brother said was true, but I was in a course called Clinical Pastoral Education, where we looked at ourselves in relationship to the people we were trying to help. And during that course, I was able to see a therapist, but I also found out something about my rage. I learned through a white supervisor that I could be angry, but I didn't have to treat people with a long-house spoon. I didn't have to separate myself from it. And so, you know, there's a lot that I learned surrounding that PTSD because I had a lot of rage. I'm a 60s young man, smoking Carmine, Brown. Y'all don't know anything about that. But, you know, this is good to me. But people are changing. And I want to say that they are asking now, what can we do? This particular church, they were I guess I could identify them.
Yeah, it's Second Baptist.
Second Baptist
on
who,
Walnut Road.
Brooks Ramsey was the one who started that church, and he marched with Dr. King. They came out of Bellevue. And so, you know, we've been doing that for about 3 years.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. And it kind of goes back to what you said, Tara, when you were talking about the strength and being intentional. I think you mentioned something about being intentional with it. No, that was, I think that was Dr. Futrell. But you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, I actually had to help a client through this specific scenario this week. He is currently he has a lot of close friends who are Caucasian. He works with a lot of Caucasian people. And he said, you know, business is, you know, it's nothing because it's business. But he said, what about my personal relationships? I just don't know, you know, how to hang out with them anymore. And so, you know, some of my friends, you know, seem to think, dude, you know, I'm not racist, you know, I love you like a brother, you know, I do anything for you. but he just feels some type of way. And so one of the things I had to encourage him in all of this is, one, self-awareness. Know what you're dealing with. You don't ever want to speak out of certain type of emotions. I think what we see a lot of times on media is people being moved by their emotions, and they're getting hyper aroused, and acting impulsive due to their emotions. And so sometimes they can lead you in the wrong direction, and then you have remorse and regret. And so what I explained to him is that, validate your feelings, what you're feeling, how you're feeling, and use whatever you need to do to kind of resolve those issues. And so just like with being intentional in your conversation, once you're at a point where you're comfortable with addressing that, then I say, if they're your friends, just like any BFF, if they're the same race as you are, sometimes your friends don't want to hear what they don't want to hear, but they know that you're coming out of a place of love. And if you have checked your emotions, and then you can safely have that dialogue, and you can help them to see and understand how you feel. And then they can know, dude, he's in a bad position. And how can and having that conversation, again, like Keith said, you educate people, because everybody, is not very aware. Their parents didn't talk to them about certain things. They didn't see certain things. A lot of people feel like it's okay that I didn't see people, as a color, but then, people of color are offended by that. And so having that dialogue helps to exchange, what is okay, what is not okay. And I think as a culture, Black people, we've kind of shied away from it ourselves, which is why other people aren't aware, because we've kind of put ourselves in a certain bubble. We've talked among ourselves. I forgot a conference I went to last, the Momentum conference in Dallas last year. There was a young lady, I can't remember her name, but she talked about how she was that girl raised in a predominantly white society. Her parents named her with the name Austin Channing Brown. If you've ever heard of her and read any of her books, she said her parents named her because they wanted her to increase her chances of getting a job application with her name on there, because her name sounded like it was Caucasian. And so she was that girl who had to raise the flag. She, was in all white school, wearing braids, holding up her culture. And she was the one having these difficult conversations on, hey, this is what we think in this community, and what are you all thinking? And that's what you all mean, And so it was kind of comical, but you have to be okay with having these conversations with your friends, and out of love, so that an understanding can be had, and then you rally up your support. And that's what we see today. We see a lot of support because a lot of conversations were had, just like Dr. Young mentioned. That was amazing. But had he not been instrumental in having that conversation, people, especially as Christian, you feel like it's enough just treating people right, and not knowing what does that essentially mean, especially in a time like this. Silence sometimes means that you're not really with me, right? But I explained to a colleague of mine, sometimes people are just scared to say anything. They're holding their breath because they don't want to be offensive. And so they don't say anything until you bring it up. Oh, okay, let me see if he's going to say something about it today. Okay, maybe not. So,
yeah, that's right. And I think that's a lot what we're seeing now, because a lot of the movement is happening by young people, and you see in Black, white, everybody a part of the movement, because I think the young people have been more open to that type of dialogue, and are leading the way and showing us what to do. So, on some levels, we're learning from them, and we always want to be there and make sure that we're giving them the room they need and the guidance they need in terms of mental health and in terms of emotional health, what they're experiencing, and helping them to know that it's okay. And like you said, be aware of your what you're feeling, and as professionals, as therapists and counselors, being able to validate what they're feeling and help them move and process through that, I think is important, as it is for parents, and as it is for in relationships, whether it's spouses, significant others, because we're seeing so many different things in our communities that are going on and in our world. So I just wanted to make sure that we took a moment to talk about these things. We could go so many different places. There's so much to talk about. Trying to narrow it in is challenging, especially from a faith-based perspective. And I think all of us are from that perspective. there's a lot that we need to address too. Ms. Young.
I was going to bounce back on what Dr. Futrell said. We were talking about the fact that during this pandemic, we're unable to touch one another.
Mhm.
That was very powerful what she was saying, because we've been dealing with over the years the blessing by Gary Smalley, and the first element in that blessing is meaningful touch. And that element has been removed, but it's interesting that there are four other elements in the blessing, and those four elements are all about what comes out of our mouth, what we say, positive words, words that give our value, words that give a special picture of the future. Those are the things that we have left. So during this season, we got to encourage each other with our words.
That's right.
Even most of the trouble that the people are in today is because of what they've been saying, because they're hearing them on tape, and so the words that we speak, we can help each other even without the touch. For now, touch is important, but for now, without the touch, we have to move to the power of what we say, and it's
Right.
the blessing. Gary Smalley did it well.
I did want to. I know you guys can't see me trying to dip in because you can't see me. But I wanted to piggyback a little bit off of what Tara was saying, because it reminded me, and what Mrs. William Young just said. It reminded me of a brief interaction I had with someone on Facebook this morning. And I wanted to be intentional with my words with this person, because I love him to death, but you talk about somebody very passionate in his speech and forceful, and I love that energy about him. But someone posted a picture of a Black family standing in front of their door with the entire family was holding weapons, including the children. And the comment was, what does this make you feel? And so I responded and I said, sad. And my friend commented back and said, well, why does this make you sad? And so I took the time and I said, well, I got time today, so I'm going to tell you that although I feel pride that that we are taking the stance to say that I will protect my family if I have to, and that we are accountable in that, but I'm sad that it has to be that way. I'm sad that children have to feel like they have to pick up a weapon to protect their parents. They're not supposed to protect us. I'm sad that they are missing out on so much of their childhood, because in 6 months they've witnessed someone, not a television show or video game, they have witnessed someone be murdered. They have been quarantined. They have had education taken away from them. They have been taken away from their friends. We have children who are in households that are unsafe, and they don't have anybody to tell, and they can't get away from. And I'm sad about that. And he came back, well, I think, and this, and gave me all his thoughts. And I said, David, you asked me how do I feel. You didn't ask me what my thoughts were. But I tell my clients that all the time. I say, I'm going to throw a cliche therapy question at you and say, how do you feel about that? And 90% of the time, they shoot off a bunch of thoughts. And I let them get it out, because they'll say, well, I feel like, and they tell me all these things they think. And I say, okay, now that you're done thinking, what do you feel? And anger is secondary. So tell me what your primary emotion is. Are you afraid, and so you become defensive and then you get angry? Or, are your feelings hurt? We just don't tap into that anymore. We've just become complacent. It's comfortable to be angry, because you feel like I can get you up off of me if I'm angry, versus if I tell you how I feel, then I can't show my vulnerability.
And we all know that anger is not the primary emotion. So thank you for sharing. Right.
Pain is primary.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's what we need to help our young people see, and people in general. We talked about grief. We talked about We see anger, but we know as therapists that pain is that primary, one of those, or fear, or, some other feeling is the primary. It's going to be important. I want to stop and say, we got about 15 minutes. I want to stop and say, the things that you all have shared, if you could type them in the chat, or if you could email them to me so we can post them. So I want people to have takeaways from here. Everything everybody has shared is so important. And I definitely want you, Dr. Futrell, to put those things in there that you talked about in terms of the power of touch, intentional with the words, the things that we can do, not the power of touch, things that we can do because we've removed that, so, and then everything that you shared, Tara, everybody, please put those in so people will have takeaways. And one last thing that I wanted to say, because, and I wanted to talk about this because I was going through so many emotions, and, I have a master's in clinical mental health counseling and know these things. I'm a believer, and I, know what to do, but because, I'm also human, and I, feel like we all need to have this conversation so we can breathe. George Floyd, that's the one thing that came out of, he couldn't breathe. So we have to take the time to breathe in honor of him, and to give each other that space to breathe. And, having information, helping one another through our emotions and our psychological state will help us to breathe. Begin to talk about this, because some of us are holding our breath. Some people are bottling up their feelings and their thoughts. And one thing that resonated again, Dr. Futrell, when you said, we're talking about what we're thinking, we're not expressing what we're feeling. So that is really key as well. And we want to give people the opportunity to process your thoughts, as well as assess and process your feelings, and help them put their feelings where, help them process through their feelings and place them where they should be, so you can begin to heal and move and grow, and continue on in getting where we want to go. There's so much trauma going on. I want you all to take a few minutes to help people process the trauma, and whatever you want to say as we wrap up, in terms of minding our emotions and our heart at a time in our city, at a time in our nation, but particularly in our city. Every city has its own issues, and we have ours. So knowing what we're dealing with in our city, and you could kind of speak to that, minding our hearts and our minds during this time. Each person just take a few minutes and say whatever's on your heart, in helping people process, whether they're processing the trauma, whether they're processing the unknown, whether they're dealing with domestic violence, whether they're dealing with loss of a grief through loss of a life, or loss of a way of life, or a job, or there's so many different things. And children, like she said, have experienced so many different things. We're people of faith, but for those that don't have faith, those that are dealing with it on their own, just kind of help us with some words, last words, everyone. We can start with the young, or whoever wants to.
I want to say this, grieving is normal, natural, and necessary. And in light of the great losses that we have incurred in this country, it's necessary to grieve. I can't say enough about the necessity of grieving. And grieving is a set of emotions, and there are steps in the grief process. The first is that we have to accept the reality of the loss. And the second is that we have to experience the pain. You can't get over the pain unless you feel it. The third thing is that we have to learn how to live without whatever and whoever we've lost. And the fourth stage in the grief process is when we reinvest that energy that we had in that which we've lost back into life again.
Absolutely. Miss Young, did you?
I,
You did
I, I I actually, he did most of it. I mean, he was the worker tonight. But I wanted to encourage those who may think that it's really dark right now. I'm just going to give one sentence that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, they may be in the tunnel, but there's some light at the end. Just keep moving. Don't stop moving. If they keep moving, they'll get to the end of the tunnel and the light will shine again.
Amen. Great. Awesome. Keith, Tara, Dr. Futrell.
I'll probably steal a couple of things from our friends in recovery. You know, they say one day at a time, and that's really all we can control with God's help. We can't even control that, but that's all we can experience is what's happening right now. So take each day's needs at that time and try not to stress about the future. I also love their little HALT acronym. I don't know if y'all know that one, but just don't let yourself get too hungry, which I am right now, angry, lonely, or tired, right? So, basically listen to our bodies, take good care of ourselves, but not let negative emotions like anger get out of control. And even in a time of social distancing, don't get too lonely, even if you've got to, stay out in the driveway, 6 feet apart. We've had some driveway visitors, which is just weird, isn't it? These during this last season, but folks that knew we were being careful, so they'd call on the phone and say, hey, come out your front door. So we were probably more like 12 feet apart, but it was still fun, just to catch up with church friends and people that we can't see because of all the social distancing, and not get too tired. Try to get your rest. Boy, insomnia is a huge problem, especially these days. So people are stressed about that. So you don't need me chiding you to get better sleep, but try to if you can by doing all those things we need to do. Get a little exercise, cut out the caffeine later in the day, all of that stuff, and maybe journal to get some of this stuff out of your mind before your head hits the pillow.
Absolutely.
And I would say, again, everybody said a lot of lovely things, but the one thing that I would add is for everyone to become very aware of adverse childhood experiences. And one of the things that I find very beneficial for my therapeutic practice is when I inform people of the things that happen to them and how their epigenetics impacts the way they respond to various stressors, how they manage their day-to-day stressors, they are more aware and more equipped, and they're more insightful and open to change, to understand how the keys to how they can reach their children and how they can help protect their children, just by having an understanding of what is going on with them. They initially come in, it's all my child, I want you to fix my child. But when I get to talking about average childhood experiences, and I admonish and recommend that anyone listening to our panel today, if you have time, Google average childhood experiences, make yourself aware of what that is, and that will, I promise you, bring a light bulb into your life of some things that you never realized may have an impact on your child, as a result of the things that have happened to you or even your parents. And so
Absolutely.
knowing that you're more open and understanding and empathetic, and the biggest thing parents can do, the biggest mistake, is to constantly discipline your child or give them consequences for things that are really beyond their control. If they have underlying mental health issues due to family history, it's not their fault that they can't stay on task. It's not their fault that they get, 38 hot or go to 100 in a split second. That's just in them. And I think having the awareness and understanding helps them to kind of, again, going back to what I said initially, it helps them to level the bar and actually deal with their child in an equitable way. We always talk about equal versus equitable, but if you know one child struggles with a lot of stuff that another child has, you have to kind of bring things down and have an understanding. And again, developing that relationship kind of cultivates that. And so you can help your child by just making yourself and them aware of things that they struggle with. And again, those ACEs is very important.
Absolutely. And before we get to go, Dr. Futrell, when you talk about ACEs, when you think about it's what happened to you, even as a culture, you know, a lot of that conversation that you're having, if people can understand ACEs, then they can understand the fact that what has happened to us as a people, what has happened in our culture, what's happened to us as in America, it's going to impact, you know, who we are right now. So even bringing into that larger context will help to begin the dialogue and maybe help us understand each other and begin at that point to heal or to improve things throughout, you know, through regardless of the trauma that we've had, we are going to have to move forward in healing. We're going to end with Dr. Futrell.
It's interesting that Mr. Keith, it's Russell, right?
Hustle.
Hustle. I'm like, am I saying that wrong? That you took the thought of the borrowing from our A&D friends, because I almost always say to all of my clients how important the serenity prayer is. And if they want to take the word prayer off and just say serenity poem, then that's fine. But just being so aware of yourself that you pay attention to the things that you can't control, and that if we're intentional in our thoughts, we will realize that 99% of what goes on around us, we have absolutely no control over, but we can manage our perceptions of it. We can manage how we feel about it. We can manage how intensely and how long we allow those emotions to linger within us. So just, you know, having serenity, just waking up every day and, you know, trying to get up in enough time to lay in your bed and be mindful. Hear the sounds of your house and smell the smells of the room, and even the person laying next to you who's snoring. Just take a minute and be aware, and, you know, allow your mind and your spirit to wake up before you jump out the bed and do all the things and conquer all of the terrible things that we have to face, and then go back to bed and do it all over again.
Absolutely. We want to live each day to the fullest and with the help that we need. And if you are in a place that, you know, where you are now, if you need that help, reach out to someone. And you can reach out to us and we'll give you the contact information for our panelists tonight. I thank you all for being with us. You all have shared some great information. Hopefully we've started the conversation and they can take it from here. We ask you to reach out to us, Memphis City Council, on all of our social media platforms, and myself. Again, I'm Rhonda Logan with District 1. Just letting you know that I love all of you. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. I appreciate my panel for being here and sharing all of the information with you. And again, if you need help, if you need some help during this time, reach out and we can hook you up with any of our guests tonight. Don't forget to share your information with me, you all, so we can put it there. And you all, thank you for tuning in. You all continue to stay safe and healthy. Wear your mask and social distancing. God bless you. Y'all have a good night.
Good night.
Night.
You.